Steve Leder's latest book, The Beauty of What Remains, is about grief and loss. He's also the rabbi of the largest Reformed synagogue in the United States, Wilshire Boulevard Temple. He's going to be here with us in a moment in conversation with Mayor Daniella Levine Cava, Miami's own leader. Let's go ahead and hear what they have to say.
Madam Mayor, it's a great honor, really an honor for me to be with you. I have deep affection for Miami because I grew up in Minnesota, and every December, all 7 of the leaders would get on a plane and fly to Miami Beach and have a 2-week food fest. So it was the first time I ever saw the ocean or a palm tree. I'll never forget it. So, I really do love Miami. And I thought maybe we'd begin our conversation by sharing with everyone a remark I made before we started recording, which is that in a way, because of that horrible building collapse, you kind of stepped up as the rabbi in that situation. And I'm wondering, who prepared you for that? And what was that like for you?
Well, Rabbi, truthfully, I have been on a spiritual journey for the last couple of decades. And I think my wisdom of dealing with disaster in the roles that I've had in public life, but also just my now 66 years on this planet. And then the spiritual quest was very much about being and less doing, and being a better listener, slowing down and being present. And I think that was critical to, well, being elected to public office, and certainly for those moments that month in Surfside, grounding me in being present for the community.
Did you learn anything new in that experience about loss?
I learned that people can really lift each other up through the power of prayer or karma or whatever is the spirit. But there was so much spirit present in that community, physically in the immediate area, all of the first responders, that just inspired me every moment, watching their tenacity, their persistence, their dedication. And then around the world, all around the world, and even the media. I was standing with the media twice daily for briefings, and it was in their hearts. They were crying. It was a powerful, powerful time of unity coming together to address something that was so unimaginable and brought us all together.
Yeah, I remember, this was many years ago, a man whose 30-year-old daughter was killed in a car accident was at Shiva, everyone's arms around each other singing at the end, and he said, "This changes nothing, but it means everything." And I really never heard it put better than that.
Yeah. So, we had these families that were there waiting and hoping for news of a loved one's survival. And then we had the survivors who had lost everything physical, right, and memories and so on in their lives and their peace of mind, right? Everybody lost so much. And I think just that sense of togetherness and commitment, and they felt it. They were so aware of the commitment to them and their well-being that they, even in their denial, anger, anguish, grief, they were able to come around and be grateful.
Yeah, they weren't alone. They weren't alone, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That is exactly right.
Yeah, real empathy is just, we're here with you.
Yes.
No answers, no solutions.
Right.
No, it could have been worse. Just, we're here with you.
That's right.
I want to share a thought with you, see if it resonates or not. I've never, as a rabbi, had to step into a massive disaster like the Twin Towers or a hurricane. Or, we had one horrible earthquake in Los Angeles in the 34 years I've been there. We've had some far less horrible, but one horrible earthquake, but very few deaths in my community. But COVID is as close to a massive disaster. There was a time when I was doing 3 or 4 funerals a week. And I realized something, and I thought about it when I think it was 98 people died. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, I think it was 98. And I was hearing the media say, 98 people died. And because of COVID, I think about that differently now. I think of it as one person died 98 times.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is that every single person is his or her own world. Someone's brother, sister, mother, aunt, cousin, friend, child, parent. They have a world of connections. They have a world of relationships and value. And I think it, for me at least, it changes the way I think about it when I shift from 700,000 people have died from COVID to one person has died 700,000 times.
Mm.
I think it's a very different way of seeing it. I don't think the media frames it that way because I can't say like big numbers, but big numbers get attention. And I think if we break it down in that way, it's much easier to understand people's grief and the magnitude of the loss. One person,
So,
700,000 times is very
yeah.
700,000 dead.
Well, we know that it's so critical to not become inured to the loss, to the death. And I think for the 98, it was a daily count,
Right.
and everybody waiting really with bated breath. What would be the next number? I know for me, actually, even talking about it brings back a trauma. What would be the next number? How many more would we find? Would there be anyone alive? It was very, very anxiety producing without these being people in my own personal life. The other is that those 98 were connected to thousands of people.
Exactly. It's one person 98 times.
It was like a United Nations.
Yep.
So many countries, nationalities, so many cousins, grandparents, etc., friends, colleagues. The building had been there long enough that many people had lived there and moved on. And really in our community, it was not very many degrees of separation to
Right.
those.
And let me ask you this. I was wondering this also. I think that one of the many things we lost in COVID, all of us, was our sense of invulnerability.
Mm.
It really taught us all just how vulnerable and that our lives literally are in each other's hands. And that's a new experience for many, many people. And I'm wondering if that one building or half of that complex that collapsed created a similar sense of vulnerability up and down the coast for people who are living in similar circumstances. And does that PTSD still remain, or have people kind of gone back to their default setting?
I completely agree that that's a big part of why it resonated so much for so many, and not just on our coasts, but throughout the world. And of course, it's not just coastal, it's really buildings everywhere that are vulnerable. And what do we know about building construction? And what do we know about the people that are certifying safety? And how are we sharing information about those vulnerabilities. So it certainly created a kind of a panic reaction in the immediate, and for many still. And so many pieces of legislation are being drafted, many changes in the protocols being considered. We've strengthened some of our practices in Miami-Dade County and looking for legislative changes as well. Not because we think we weren't doing a good job of certifying building safety, but just because there were some loopholes, like basically when condominiums are managed by people,
Right.
and then they are making those hard choices. How much money to raise? How risky is it? How
Right.
much time should we allow
Yeah.
for the repairs? These are very, it's that communal, you're not responsible entirely. It's a collective responsibility.
Right. And no one likes to tax themselves. So
Yeah.
that's a hard one. Yes. Yeah. And but what about would you say, I know you're out in the community with your ear to the ground quite a bit. I'm interested in this because I think it has greater ramifications. It's sort of as big as it was, nevertheless, a microcosmic study for COVID, I think, and for all grief and loss. Do you feel like most have returned to their default setting and get into their elevators and don't think about it anymore? Or do you think it's more omnipresent than that?
I think it's very personal. I think there are people that are more anxious,
Mhm.
and there are people that are take more risk. I believe some people are more cautious about buying units in condominiums. I know that to be the case. And recently I learned that it's very hard to get records until you sign a contract. So that is causing some disturbance in that force. But for sure, for most people, this is no longer front page news.
Mhm. Internally either. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. How about for you?
I feel very motivated to improve these safety protocols, and very eager to increase the transparency and the mutual accountability. I think this is an important responsibility that I bear.
Yeah. My book on loss is called The Beauty of What Remains. And oh, there you go. You have it. I got to get a snapshot of that. We're going to Instagram that, Madam Mayor. It really is about what you just said in many ways, which is, I often say to people, if you have to go through hell, don't come out empty handed. And that's really is you're trying to make sure that the county, the state, the nation doesn't come out of that terrible hell empty-handed. And that's not to say, don't get me wrong, that's not to say that it's worth it, that it's worth the changes that will happen, that those 98 souls were worth it. All I'm saying is let's not let it be worth less. Right.
So clearly we all have to learn from everything that we go through in life. And this being a very big learning opportunity. We've invested in a major post-action report. We're going to be producing what we hope will be a playbook for others. Truthfully, we are more prepared than most in South Florida because of the numbers of disasters that we've experienced and the high skill and training of our professionals, the fighter first responders, the police, our building department, our water and sewer. It was a whole of government response, and they rushed to the scene and they never left.
Yeah, and they knew what they were doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what was the most, and I know this might sound like an odd question, but what was the most beautiful thing you saw or heard or felt in the midst of all of that pain?
I felt that, well, watching these firefighters, with their determination to find people alive in the first couple of weeks,
Inspiring.
and their personal commitment to doing that. This is truly their calling. This is what they've been trained for. It's not a job. It's really a calling. And watching that determination filled me with awe.
Mm.
And then watching the families who were waiting for news come to be aware of that, watching them see and trust that these people were there in every way for them was truly, truly humbling.
Yeah. Yeah. And beautiful in its own way.
And beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quote Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers.
Yeah.
That's where the inspiration is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the hope. That's beautiful. How did and this is just us talking. How did the clergy do? Did they step up? Did they step in? What
Yeah.
role did they play, and in what ways was it different, and in what ways was it similar to what you were doing?
Yeah. We have a very active clergy in our fire and police departments, and they're very knowledgeable of the community. This community did have a significant Jewish population, but also Catholic, Protestant, Hindu. We had very, very diverse, and all of the clergy showed up. And they showed up from the local area, they showed up from the broader community, they showed up internationally. So we had a very, very diverse representation. I worked closely, particularly with the Jewish clergy around the burial issues, the treatment of the body. And we had special meetings to make sure. Again, our first responders already were familiar with these things, but in this new situation, for example, what was the circumference around the placement of a body that would need to be preserved in case of human fluid being in the area? So we got together, we talked through a protocol, we agreed to it, and it was communicated to the community. Then you talk about the frequency of funerals. These rabbis and priests and other clergy had a very busy schedule as the month went on. And I had the great opportunity to attend quite a few of the services and was moved by each and every one.
Now, what's going to, let me preface my question for you with an observation about Israel and how they handle not disasters quite like this, but for example, a bus bombing, a terrorist attack, etc. The Israeli point of view is they get in there, they clean things up, and they make it look like it never happened as best they could, and they move on. That's their way. It's almost as if to say, we will not give in to this terror. What's going to happen on that site? What do you think is the right thing to do? There's sort of a dichotomous tension in all of us, I think, between moving on and remembering. You know, one of the things I talk about in my book that I learned, not as the rabbi, but as the son whose father died, was of the duality of memory. You know, rabbis are full of these platitudes about memory. You know, may her memory be a blessing. You'll always have him in your memories. And that's all true. Memory can be beautiful, but it's also true that it really, really hurts sometimes. It's both. You know, I actually thought that President Biden in his inaugural address put it pretty well. He said, you know, in order to heal, we have to remember, and it hurts to remember sometimes.
And by the way, the president came and he met with those families, and what a very comforting presence he was.
Yeah.
It was really quite extraordinary. Not only did he talk about his own pain quite extensively, but he listened to each and every family member took the time, went table by table, and it was a very healing time for them. We also had a memorial wall that was created outside by a young man in the community that became the focal point for public mourning.
Yeah.
And we now have archived that, and we're going to be putting it back in a place that will be spared the elements because, of course, the rain and so on affected.
So
What about is, yeah.
What are you going to do?
So there's a judge who's been assigned all manner of issues dealing with the case. There's a receiver who is responsible for working with the families and the survivors to handle their claims. And there's a duality of opinion. The people who survived mostly want to return to the building. They want to return to their homes and be made whole. And for the families of those who died, they mostly would like that to be memorialized forever. So the judge has made it very clear that he's not opposed to memorial, but he's not advocating for that. He's focusing on bringing people financial closure.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is still to be determined. There's been a tug of war with the city of Surfside, the town of Surfside, whether they would swap a parcel and then use that as a memorial. There's the city of Miami Beach just to the south that has offered a portion of a park that's right nearby. So there's various options on the table, but there is definitely a contingent of the families of victims who are horrified at the thought of a building going on that space.
Yeah. And do you, and you can choose not to answer this because I know you're a public figure and somehow this will be, other people see this and be on the record. Do you have, after all of the experience you've had with the families, your own 65 years of life and hurricanes and all of that, do you have a feeling about the right way to, or the best way? I don't think there's a right or a wrong way, but maybe the most healing and helpful way to make this determination?
So I don't subscribe to the don't give in. This was not a human, while it may have been an act of human negligence, it was not an act of
Volition, right?
Yeah, volition in that sense. And I think to remember is critically important, not just for the families directly affected, but for all of us to learn from this experience. And so I do hope that there's a middle path where there can be some recognition on the site, even if there is also a building on the site.
Yeah. That's a good solution. A great architect can definitely figure that out.
I would think so.
Yeah. Be a great one though. Honestly, that's a tricky but important goal. Yeah, good for you. Good for you. How is it being a rabbi?
Well, I of course am not a rabbi, but I loved in your book when you gave advice to the woman who was seeking to end her own life and making the decision whether to advise as a rabbi or as a man. And so I guess we all have some moments in which we play those different roles.
Yeah.
So I do feel very, very grateful and humbled to be in the role that I'm in, a comforter, certainly, a problem solver, a leader. And I think that a social worker, as I am, was the right vocation at the time. If I couldn't be a rabbi, social worker was good. And that helped, I do think so. But again, back to what impressed me so, our police, our firefighters, they all functioned with that level of compassion. I've actually asked, explain to me, how are you trained to be so compassionate? and to be such good listeners. We have, when the movie is made, there will be the hero of the movie, which is one of our assistant chiefs in the fire department, Ray Jadala. And the irony is Ray Jadala is Palestinian. And he had no fewer than 8 offers of marriage from Jewish family members who came to love and trust him.
That's the beauty of what remains. You see, that's not coming out of hell empty-handed.
That's right. So he was able to speak truthfully, fully, transparently, so that they really came to trust him. But to leaven it with just the right amount of hope when there was still hope, and then help with the transition to acceptance.
And how, as a person who suffers role stress quite a bit, you know, my congregation is extremely large, and it's demanding, and it's a very diverse community, politically, socioeconomically, and in some ways ethnically. How do you manage the role stress? You know, the dissonance that sometimes comes with being a public, private person who really doesn't have a private life in many ways, and having to be sometimes the velvet glove, sometimes the iron fist in it. How is it for you? Just I'm you know, I should, full disclosure, pretty good friends with our mayor in Los Angeles, who I think is just a great guy. Unfortunately, we're losing him to an ambassador.
Yes,
but
I saw.
So I have a sense of how he does it. How is the role stress for you? Talk to me about that. I'm asking you as a fellow that, you know, as a person who's chosen a life profession that means we run toward the fire.
Well, I do like to solve problems, and I do live in a community that I love, and I am very fortunate to be in a position to step up to the plate, if you will, and and to bring with me people who are so competent, compassionate, courageous, along with me. So I'm surrounded by people that help me get the job done, and so that's number one. Also, this Surfside tragedy has made people very aware of the role that I'm in. I'm very recognizable, and people are very grateful to me for the handling of the situation. So I am surrounded by love, and that gives me great comfort. Also, I'm 66, and I have been through the slings and arrows. I didn't think of myself as someone who was thick-skinned. I'm really not. I'm the collaborator in chief. I'm rather conflict avoidant, so I do manage to deal with some of those slings and arrows rather deftly. And then the remainder, I have a lot of really good strategy advisors.
Yeah.
And we work through.
It's really not easy sometimes. And
yeah.
But I think, you know, the way I put it in my job is that it's not an easy job, but neither is it a thankless job.
Yes, that's great. And I have a wonderful husband who's very supportive. Unfortunately, he's been watching a Netflix series about a Danish prime minister, a woman, and apparently things are not going so well in her marriage. But you know, but that's in Denmark.
Yeah, that's right, and it's fiction, so I think you're okay. Yeah. I live where they produce all of that stuff, so I wouldn't worry about it. What? I just want to think, because I know we're running out of time. If there's any, let me add. This is an interesting question for you. What's the most difficult question you've been asked as a mayor? And as a 66-year-old woman, like, what's the most, because you said you've been on a spiritual journey, and people don't go on those journeys unless they're seeking answers or the answer or an answer.
Mm.
So what is it?
Well, I have been asked by several men, basically, how am I holding up emotionally?
Women don't ask you that?
No, never.
Interesting.
And it's extremely annoying, right? I mean, they wouldn't ask a man if he goes home and cries at night. So I've been asked that in the public eye, and how I grieve, certainly very personal, but also, and I don't mind sharing, but it's, I have a job to do. I do that job. At the right times and place, I make meaning of that in my life. And I do want to say, I found your book very beautiful. Thank you. And I think, I lost my own father about a month ago to COVID, despite being vaccinated and so on. And it's been a kind of unfolding for me, peeling back layers. My mother is still alive, and so my first parent to pass. And I guess as time goes by, for me, with any grief experience, is when more of the reality sinks in. So I'm pretty good in crisis.
Yeah.
And then comes the time to incorporate and make meaning more personally.
It's waves.
Yeah, waves.
Yeah. How's your mom doing?
She has her struggles, but my mom is a very positive person. Actually, my father too. My father was in great denial about his own diminishing faculties, and was, on pretty much on the way to the hospital, was still trying to pitch that he could help somebody with their business deals.
Because in the book I say it, people die the way they live.
Yes.
That doesn't give anyone a new personality. And in your case with your father, that's a good thing, right? He was still pitching. Yeah, that's beautiful. And you're your mom, and you're clearly you, just
yes,
deeper and wiser, which is its own kind of beauty, Yeah, the first 30 days is very significant, I've found. And I found in my case that after 30 days, the clouds parted just a little bit, a bit more light, so I wish that for you.
Thank you so much.
You're an amazing person. You're just, what you're doing is so important, and we need more like you. That's for sure.
Well, thank you very much. We each do our part on this journey around the earth, and what is it that lives on? The soul, as you suggest.
Rabbi, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I feel very fortunate to get to see you from afar, and now get to hear you in person, and certainly in our local community. So thank you for spending time with us. And the book, of course, The Beauty of What Remains. And how did you come up with the title? I struggled with it when I read the book. I have to tell you, I was looking for that meaning.
The way I choose titles is I write the book first. I think if you come up with a title first, the tail wags the dog, and you're right into the title. And so I've always worked the other way around. I write the book first, and then sometimes I'll find a phrase in the book, a word in the book, half a sentence in the book, and it'll just hit me. That's the title. That's what the book is about. And this book is about, as we've said, people say it's about death, but it's really not. It's about what death teaches us in terms of enjoying and cherishing life and making our lives beautiful and making also the legacy we inherit from the people we love who have died beautiful. And that, you know, at a certain point, we either focus on the beauty that remains or we stay forever in a deep, dark hole. And, you know, obviously that's why I prefer the beauty of what remains. I think it's also as we get older, you know, this is extremely important as well to focus on what we can, not what we can't do, to focus on that remains. So it really came to me from a sentence in the book.
So the concept of beauty is really where I guess I get uncomfortable, right? Because we're told that beauty is like, you know, 5'11", 110 pounds, wearing fancy clothes, when in fact, beauty is not necessarily about what's on the outside. And it's yeah.
Frankly not at all about what's on the outside. You know, the rabbis of the Talmud said it a long time ago. Al tistakel b'kankan ela b'ma sheyesh bo. Don't look at the vessel, look at what's inside of it. Which is the rabbinic way of saying don't judge a book by its cover. You know, I think that kind of beauty that you're articulating is a kind of false idol.
Mm-hmm.
Be seduced by it. It's easy to believe it's somehow real and important. I think being healthy is important. I don't think beautiful is important, and I think beauty is relative. And you know, someone who may be beautiful in their appearance, but who is ugly on the inside, you know, I don't want to be around that person. No one wants to be around that person. So the beauty of what remains is really about the duality of memory, the duality of death, and the duality of life. It's, I think the book is mostly an exploration of duality, of these contradictory, dichotomous feelings we have when we encounter loss and memory.
You know, I want to just talk to you and when we think, you know, the tagline on your book, how our greatest fear becomes our greatest gift. And we can't let you end your time with us without talking a little bit about your relationship with your father, because it's really at the core of the book. But I don't want to speak on your behalf. Why don't you reflect a little bit about that for us?
Well, the book is made up of two streams that sometimes cross and sometimes separate, and sometimes cross and sometimes separate throughout the book. And I think that's honestly what makes it different than most books on loss. It's both a memoir and a field guide. And the memoir part, which you're referring to, is really about my lifelong relationship with my father, who was very difficult, very tough, very demanding, and also, you know, hilarious and crude and, you know, bigger than life. And then he was stricken with Alzheimer's and went through a 10-year journey through Alzheimer's, which rounded all of the sharp edges and changed our relationship pretty significantly. And the book is about also what Steve Leder, the rabbi, thought he knew about loss and grief after going through it with more than 1,000 families, which is not an exaggeration. So the book is about everything Steve Leder, the rabbi, thought he had learned about death and loss and grief and moving on from those 1,000 vicarious experiences. And how much of that was just plain wrong when Rabbi Steve Leder became Steve Leder the son, experiencing the loss of his father. And so the book, in a way, Joy, is almost an apology to everyone for whom I got so much wrong about death, loss, and grief. I don't think I did a bad job of it, helping people through it, but I have I have several different perspectives now that I never could have gained as a rabbi. I could only gain as a son. And that's the genesis of the book.
But the book was written or ended during the pandemic, right? Which is certainly a time of great loss. So were you able to take the combination of your personal experience with the experience of as a community leader and help people during a really difficult time?
Absolutely, because look, loss is loss. Okay, there are many kinds of losses. There's the loss of someone we love who dies. There's the loss of a dream. There's a loss of a marriage. There's a loss of, a double mastectomy is a loss. It's an amputation. There's a lot. I know people who lose their reputations. I mean, there are many kinds of losses, and COVID among them. Right? We lost our, as I said with the mayor, I think the big one was we all lost our sense of invulnerability. Right? We lost much of our freedom. We lost the right for our kids to be in school. We lost the basic human right to hug, to touch, to feel. So I didn't plan for the book to land in the middle of the worst pandemic in a century, but it did. And there are tremendous similarities between the things I talked about in the book and the lessons of COVID. I'll just give you a few that come to mind. First of all, COVID reinforced something that I talk about quite a bit in the book, which is it's who we have, not what we have, that makes a life, that matters. There's even a chapter in the book called Nobody Wants Your Crap. Because, stuff is just stuff. So I think that COVID definitely really made it clear that it's who we have, not what we have, and that none of us really have more than a tiny handful of people who really matter, right? It stripped away a lot of nonsense. All those lunches, breakfast, dinners with people we didn't really want to go out and be with anyway, and all these social obligations. And, it stripped away a lot of nonsense. That's the first thing. And the second thing, which of course is connected, deeply related to the first, is it taught us all, I think, that no matter how many times we hold and are held by the people we love, no matter how many times we say I love you to each other, it's never enough. It's never enough. More and more and more makes life beautiful, even in loss. And there's darkness and there's light. They coexist, and there's never one without the other. I talk in the book about the 23rd Psalm and that verse, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. And I ask people to consider a shadow. What is a shadow really? A shadow, no matter how long, no matter how dark, is actually proof of light. You cannot have a shadow unless there's a light shining. It's obstructed, right? It could be obstructed by death, by grief. I often say that grief is love obstructed, right? But it's still there and it's still shining. That's why it casts a shadow. It's never completely dark. It's all there. And I would remind us all that we walk through this valley. We don't stay in it forever. COVID is going to become manageable. Could it have become manageable sooner? Yes. Could we have done a better job? Yes. Could that building have been inspected before it came down? Yes. But we do put these things, not entirely, but behind us enough to walk back out into the light. And that's going to be true with COVID. It's already becoming true.
Human spirit, right?
Yeah, look. There's a duality. The older I get, I'm 61, Mayor's 66. The older I get, the more I appreciate how important it is to embrace the duality that exist in life, the duality of memory, the duality of love, the duality of loss. I mean, you know, Kafka said the meaning of life is that it ends. And, you know, how meaningful would life be without death, really? And I'm not trying to say death is this wonderful thing, but what if we were deathless creatures? Imagine if we were deathless beings. What would life be like? It would have no meaning. It would. Nobody would have kids. Nobody would have any ambition. Nobody would have to change anything, do anything. We would be something other than human. Wallace Stevens, the poet, I'm going to butcher his I'm going to badly paraphrase what he said, but basically he said that the beauty of a flower is that it fades. Right? That's why nobody likes plastic flowers. You know, because they have no death. They have no life. And there's real power and teaching and beauty in the fact that time is finite for all of us. It's what creates beauty in our lives.
And with that, I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
The book is The Beauty of What Remains. Rabbi Steve Leader. I understand you're hitting another home run and touching lives with your video on empathy from your sermon on Rosh Hashanah. So we can share that with our community members.
Yeah, of course.
We look forward to doing that. And continued success, Rabbi.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure
Honor
we'll be
to be
seeing you soon.
Thank you. I hope so. Please thank the mayor for me also.